Alright folks, well, it took me a lot longer to put that belt on than it should have. I was having all kinds of problems. The biggest issue was that the belt, we did the comparison. We put the two belts together and we strung them out real tight, and then we made sure they were the same length. Well, the new belt must have been just a little too small. I'm talking a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or something was wrong with it, because when I put it on there, started the car up, it kicked the belt off. I put it right back on, kicked the belt off, put it back on again, and it just would not keep the belt. So what we ended up doing to hopefully fix the car is that we changed two idlers. We had the idler on the tensioner, and then there's an idler that's smooth. We went ahead and changed those two, and I think we've got it. So I'll pop the hood open and we'll start the car up and see if we have it nice and quiet now. This is a cold start. That's when the issue was more prevalent. So this car sat overnight, so let's see if we can get it to make the noise. Hopefully it does not. So let's see here. One idler we changed is the one that the light is focused on right now, and then the other one is down. I don't know. That's no good. We get the belt over a rib. Let's see if you guys can see that. Just nowhere to get a good camera view. I'll have to fix that. Great. All right, we'll give her a shot here in a second. Alright folks, I got the new belt on and trying to go through and get this thing silenced up. I ended up putting on a new tensioner. I'm going to show all the components that I put on and kind of what I had to do later on the bench, but just to kind of go over it. I changed out this pulley right here. This pulley used to be steel. Now it's a plastic pulley with a bearing in the same way. Only thing I had to do here is behind this plate, that plate used to bolt right onto there, right through it, right to the bearing. One thing I had to do is I had to take a washer kind of like this and just sandwich it in there. This metal shield was cutting into the inside edge of my pulley just a little bit. So I just put this washer in there, just a little spacer. It's still pushing against the race of the bearing, so it's nice and tight. It's not loose at all. As you can see, I'm not moving it, and it still keeps that shield, but that was one thing I had to modify. And then the other thing that we changed was the tensioner. So right here you can see the tensioner. Let me get a little light on it for you. So right here's the tensioner. The tensioner is not hard to change. There's two 10mm head bolts. There's one you can see, and then the other one's just past the belt up there. And those are the two things we had to change. To get access to that, it's a little more involved. You're going to want to take this panel off, and if you can kind of see, these two screws two clips right here are actually held behind behind this splash shield. So you're going to want to save yourself the time and just take the few 7mm bolts out from the bottom, get this all the clips kind of in here along the wheel well right here. Take those all out, get it pulled back so you can come up here on the front side, and the clips are right there. You can see kind of there, and then right there on that black piece at the bottom. You take those out, and that gets this splash shield all out of the way and makes this job a lot easier. You also want to remember which way the belt goes. I'm going to stab a picture in here of how the belt goes on the 2.5. The sizes might be a little exaggerated, but at least that is exactly how it goes. So we've got a good idea on how that works. And now I can get this all put back together, and we'll start it up so you can see how it sounds. Alright folks, so here's a look at the components that I end up replacing. This was the idler on the tensioner. So this is the tensioner. It was stuck on the block of the engine. I took this pulley off and put a new one on, so the new one is still on here because that wasn't the whole problem. This is the top idler that I was talking about earlier in the video. This is made out of steel. You can see it's got a very deep relief. Let me see if I can get up here for you guys to see. It's got a pretty deep relief in here for that metal washer to kind of sink in on the edge, and it doesn't matter which way you put it because it's centered, the bearing's centered on the pulley, but it's got a very deep relief. The pulley here is almost identical. The plastic pulley on the tensioner and the one I took off are almost identical. So what was happening is that metal washer was contacting these ribs because the relief is not quite as deep. So what I did is I took a washer like this and put it on there and then put the metal plate on. So with that, you can see that I'm still pushing against the inner race, and I'm not even pushing on the seal because the seal is inset. So I got the metal washer in there, and I put the metal shield and the bolt on, and that's kind of how it sits on the engine then. And that keeps the metal shield from grinding on the plastic. It would probably clear itself, really no issue. It was just barely contacting, but I didn't want to have that problem. One thing I kept trying to figure out is why I kept throwing the belt. So in the ending I was trying to film, the belt was setting off of this pulley about right here. It was setting off something like this. It was off the edge. And so I didn't know. I don't want to send my wife down the road with this issue without knowing what the problem was. So I found the problem. And here, let me get it up here where you guys can see. You see this crack right here? This crack is not consistent. So if I spin this around, you'll see it gets a little bit bigger right here. And then there's an overlap here, so that's not ideal. But it is very, very large here. And like I said, there's an overlap. And then it's very, very shallow right in this area. So what has happened is, if you look right here, you can really see it, is that this material is worn away. So as the tensioner has bounced, if you pull it this way, it takes the tension off. So right now it's at full tension. But as it has gone with the belt, so either the belt has gotten really worn out or whatever, it has worn through this. So now it doesn't sit perfectly in line. If you get it lined up, it actually sits kind of like this. So this is exaggerated, of course. So if I'm trying to line it up with you guys, it was sitting more like that. So if it was, this is straight, it was sitting like this, and that was what was allowing the belt to come around and then start jumping off, but the ribs would catch on this edge and not completely come off. If you are looking to buy this, from Rock Auto or some other online vendor, I would definitely get myself, a new tensioner, get myself a ribbed pulley to replace the top one, and get a flat pulley so that you can change this tensioner as well, or idler. This is the idler, this is another idler, and then the tensioner, and a belt. And you may be able to save some money if you've got some discount codes and all that stuff, but if I was having a little bit of chirping like you will hear at the beginning of this video till the new ending here, I would go and change these things. The other thing that could cause the chirping is possibly the alternator. but I would take my chances changing these items. I've got it back together. I'm going to take you guys over and let you hear me start the car, and hopefully the noise is still gone. The engine has been off for a couple hours now because it's been sitting in the shop while I went and got parts. So let's go check it out. Now I'm by no means an AS E or AS3 or any kind of certified mechanic, but this is something that worked for me. So this is how the idler sits in the engine. I took my ratchet with this extension. I used a 3-inch extension, my 3/8 drive ratchet, and this sits just like this in the car. And I cranked it down, and when I cranked it around, I'm not going to be able to do it in my hand. I put the ratchet up against the axle, and then I took a couple of ratchet straps. I used zip ties. I used a couple of zip ties against that, and I just flipped the belt off, and I made sure never to put my finger between the belt and the pulley. But you know, then you had all the tension was on the ratchet. It was sitting there, and you could fish the belt through. And I got it back down there real close. And again, I made sure never to put my finger over the edge of this pulley where the belt would catch it. And you know, I just pushed the belt over the pulley, pushed a little pressure back on this to get it in my hand, and I cut the zip ties and then pulled my ratchet out, and the tensioner fell right into place, and I had no problems. So that's something you can try if you want to do this by yourself. Alright, so the car's been sitting here for a couple hours. I just set it down. Let's go ahead and give it a start. So as you can tell on that startup, it didn't make that annoying squeak. There's a couple other little noises on startup, something from the engine, but that's not the accessory belt setup, so we're good. So that's going to end this episode of CB Rebuilds. I like to make these little videos when I'm working on things because they seem to help other people out. So serpentine accessory belt on this engine is not hard to change. You're going to want to go ahead and jack up the passenger side, take the wheel off, put a jack stand on the subframe, go ahead and take the front wheelhouse lining out, get those clips out, and then that way you can get that splash shield. I showed you earlier that the clips are kind of hidden. Let's go ahead and get those out of the way, and then that makes this a little more accessible. You're going to want to make sure you get the belt in the right orientation when you go through everything, but it really isn't that hard. The only problem is, if you've got big mitts like me, is that there's not a lot of room between this accessory set and the frame rail, and so I had to do some fishing around with the belt, or I'd hold a couple of the pulleys and feed a little belt over to get it to slide where I want it to go. So I think this is definitely something you can do at home in your driveway, and if you've got all the components, really all you need is a 7mm to take the little screws out for the wheelhouse panel, a clip puller to pull the clips out. I needed a 10mm, a 13mm, and a 15mm, and I just used a couple of extensions and a 3/8 ratchet, 3/8 drive ratchet, and it was pretty simple. But thanks for watching, and as always, get out there and try something. You can work on anything if you give it a little effort.